time is it? It's Father Time, the King of Truth. What you're going to see now is a reenactment of what was presented to me, one of the largest slave rebellions in Louisiana back in the 1800s. Something we never heard about. Yes. So they say one of the largest slave rebellions back in the 1800s, in Louisiana, New Orleans. A reenactment. So I'm going to present a little bit of this to you, and let's just see where this goes.
The centuries. Each step on this 26-mile march along this Louisiana road is a measure of a story that has been suppressed until now. What's happening here represents a piece of history you probably never learned in school. The horses trot to the pulse of revolution. The muskets and machetes are a response to the daily horrors and dehumanization faced by an enslaved people. And each part, each player, is in sync to form a present-day representation of the nation's largest slave revolt. The 1811 slave revolt outside New Orleans is so unknown, you probably wouldn't even recognize its name, the German Coast Uprising.
It's a significant part of history because even before the civil rights movement of the 60s and even the 50s, you see that there was a desire for freedom way back in the 1800s.
In 1811, these enslaved rebels had the most radical idea of freedom and emancipation in the United States at that time.
Hey fam, I'm Imayan. Today, we're going to travel back in time so I can tell you why there's this plaque marking the nation's largest slave rebellion and why you've probably never even heard of that uprising. Spoiler alert, it's by design.
When my babies were born, everything changed. I had so many decisions to make, but one choice that I never...
This is what more than $1 million looks like. It's costumes, props, planning, and people. In 1712, Louisiana only had 10 Africans. By the start of the Civil War in 1860, the state had more than 330,000 enslaved people. Hundreds of years later, the descendants of the African diaspora are walking alongside each other as a reminder of a historic event. When a slave named Charles Dillon plotted what would become the nation's largest slave revolt 208 years ago, he couldn't have envisioned that much money or an artist named Dred Scott reimagining his rebellion for the 21st century.
And I wanted to do this because I'm very interested in the past, how the past sets the stage for the present. And I think it's really important for people to learn about this history, but also to think about how we get free today.
Scott first conceived of the idea 8 years ago and has spent the last 6 pulling together this massive reenactment, which is happening about 30 miles outside of New Orleans. The project features hundreds of reenactors taking on the roles of enslaved people fighting for their freedom in a place where you can still see pristine plantations 154 years after the Civil War.
My great-grandparents came to the United States as slaves. My great-grandmother came to the United States through North Carolina as a slave. My great-grandfather came through the Caribbean islands as a slave here in Louisiana. And my mother was born on a plantation. So that also has kind of spurred the curiosity in me.
Pastor Donald Ray August Sr. is a son of La Place, Louisiana, and he leads a church that he says sits on the land of former slaves' quarters. He'll be a reenactor in this event, and though the rebellion happened in his hometown, he hadn't learned about it until he was far into adulthood.
I don't remember ever hearing anything about the 1811 slave uprising. Even the elders in this area spoke very little about something that occurred here. So it's that unspoken, maybe even uncomfortable part of history that many people didn't want to delve into.
Today, the place where enslaved people gathered arms is marked with roadways and refineries. It's in the shadow of these modern-day structures that Scott's art unfolds in St. John the Baptist, St. Charles, and Orleans parishes. I'm standing on the grounds that helped kill the myth of the happy slave, and it all happened just 1 year before Louisiana gained statehood. It was raining on January 8th, 1811, when Charles Delaune and a group of an estimated 25 slaves attacked the sleeping owner, Manuel Andre, killed his son, and started a rebellion. They wanted to start a free republic for black people in New Orleans. Louisiana's uprising was partially inspired by news of Haiti's revolution. That anti-slavery rebellion won freedom for enslaved people and created the sovereign island nation in 1804. What does it feel like to be dressed up and embody the spirit of one of these rebels who was enslaved and fighting for freedom?
This is just like wearing a mask that gives that energy. I can walk until tomorrow. I will not feel tired. I'm telling you.
Ibrahim Asek is one of the people who advised Scott as he organized this project. As the director of research for the Whitney Plantation, he spent his entire career studying the transatlantic slave trade. And he says it's his duty to educate people about the African diaspora.
Some people don't want you to be educated because, educated people cannot be enslaved.
I met people who had traveled from as close as Mississippi and as far off as Washington, D.C. to participate in this demonstration. There were also many locals. Having the community's involvement was a must for Scott, a person who more than 30 years ago named himself after the man in the Supreme Court's most infamous decision. In 1847, Dred Scott unsuccessfully sued for his freedom. 10 years later, our highest court said no person of African ancestry, whether they were free or enslaved, could become a U.S. citizen.
This particular story is also suppressed because from day one, the governor actually spun the story as there's not much to see here. The French colonial society was terrified of this slave rebellion and the possibility that it could have been successful. They also wanted to downplay its significance because they didn't want people to think there was huge numbers of revolting and rebelling enslaved people.
Another reason this major event is lesser known may be because of this: Jim Crow.
Jim Crow was another trauma, another layer of trauma. I think that trauma, that newer trauma, just did hide the old trauma.
The segregationist laws across the Deep South made black people second-class citizens until the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964. Unlike 1811, the 2019 version of the rebellion successfully makes it to New Orleans. Scott was deliberate in his choice not to visualize the uprising's brutal ending.
That white people did some terrible things during the times of slavery, that's not news. What is news is that black people had agency and self-determination and were fighting for freedom.
In reality, some enslaved people were able to escape. Others were captured and returned to bondage. And 45 people, including Charles Delaune, were sentenced to death. Their heads were placed on poles alongside the river levee from New Orleans to Laplace to serve as a gruesome warning and reminder another slave uprising would not be tolerated.
They were able to formulate a plan and to carry it out, even though it did not end completely successful, but they had the desire to even try. So that exemplifies a lot of courage.
In Scott's historical adaptation, the rebellion ends in this jubilant celebration. There's dancing and joy and a direct connection to some of today's biggest issues.
We don't have those same obstacles today, and yet we need to fight in as determined a way as they did.
Father Time, the King of Truth. Just bring you a few things of history that we don't know. You might not want to know. But anyway, just trying to enlighten your mind. I know it's doing some things for me. I wasn't familiar with it. Hopefully you enjoyed that. And maybe you'll delve further into things from the past and you can see the future. Oh, it's a cruel thing. Other things that I have in store, the transatlantic. And oh, that is an ugly scene, the transatlantic. That's where so many of us were brought to the new nation. So anyway, by the time the King of Truth is signing out, please hit the like button, subscribe, and tell your friends. Like I said, there's so much history, and actually what's going on right now is ugly. And I'm definitely going to get into that in between, because things are in ruin. And I definitely had to speak about that. So anyway, by the time the King of Truth is signing out, peace.